Education Module A. Legislation that affects those that work with children in the Diocese of Broken Bay. The module will address 1. Mandatory reporting, 2. The Reportable Conduct Scheme, and 3. The new reforms to strengthen child abuse laws. Later in the module, you will use this handout. Please have it handy. As we progress through the content, this table will assist to summarise the information. Getting your head around the law can be tricky, and I find that it helps to break it down to smaller, easier to handle chunks of information. The first topic is mandatory reporting. Under the Children and Young Persons Care and Protection Act 1998, New South Wales, certain persons are mandatory reporters who are under a legal obligation to make a report to the Department of Communities and Justice if they have reasonable grounds to suspect that a child is or may be at risk of significant harm. The legislation was extended to include persons in religious ministry or persons providing religion-based activities to children as mandatory reporters. Shortly, we will give examples of which roles in the parish and chancery would be mandatory reporters. A mandatory reporter must make a report when they have reasonable grounds to suspect that a child is at risk of significant harm, and those grounds arise during their work or role. You may later like to refer to the fact sheet to assist in understanding the details of the harm circumstance that children may be at risk of experiencing. The categories are shown here: physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, psychological harm, danger to self or others, carer concern, relinquishing care, and unborn child. How to decide whether you need to make a report. Firstly, complete the Mandatory Reporter Guide, MRG, before you consider making a report. The MRG is found online at www.reporter.childstory.nsw.gov.au. The MRG landing page looks like this. To start the MRG, select the main decision tree that most closely matches the concern you have. If you have more than one concern, start with your most serious concern. After selecting a decision tree, you will be asked a series of questions. Read the definition to complete your answer. At the end, you will receive a decision report outlining what to do next. What does the MRG say to do? The outcome depends on the seriousness of the concern. The outcome of the MRG will advise you to 1. Make an immediate report to the Child Protection Helpline or report to the Child Protection Helpline on 132 111 and have ready the essential details. You may be advised to make an e-report for non-immediate matters, or you may be advised to continue to monitor and support. Regardless of the advised outcome from the MRG, always contact the Office for Safeguarding for help. Remember, there are many ways to support a family in need, and a statutory response is not always required. There are local agencies that provide early intervention services for families in need. It is now time to refer to your guided learning notes. The activity involves you completing the MRG. To access the MRG website, copy the link provided. Complete the activity by reading the instructions on your screen. Now pause the video. Welcome back. There is now a check-in question. The question is, who are mandatory reporters? A. Everyone, B. Clergy only, or C. Clergy and lay people who provide religious-based ministry to children. The answer is C. Clergy and lay people who provide religious-based ministry to children are mandatory reporters in the parish context. The Reportable Conduct Scheme. The Reportable Conduct Scheme is different. It is in place to monitor the behaviour of those that work with children. that is, the behaviour of adults towards children. From the 1st of March 2020, the Children's Guardian Act 2019 came into effect and replaced the existing Part 3A of the New South Wales Ombudsman Act 1974. The Act provides a framework for the Reportable Conduct Scheme. The scheme is now administered by the New South Wales Office of the Children's Guardian, where prior to 1st of March 2020 it was administered by the New South Wales Ombudsman. The scheme is in place to protect children as well as those adults that work with children. Anyone who has a Working with Children check for their engagement with our diocese now falls under the Reportable Conduct Scheme. The Bishop is ultimately responsible as the head of relevant entity in ensuring systems are in place for reporting, responding, and reducing the likelihood of reportable conduct. The next check-in question. The question is, what does the scheme aim to do? A. Monitor the behaviour of those that work with children in New South Wales. B. Protect children and workers. Or C. Both A and B. The answer is C. Both A and B. A further check-in question. The question is, who is the head of relevant entity? A. Parish priest. B. Office for Safeguarding. Or C. Bishop Anthony. The answer is C. Bishop Anthony Randazzo, the Bishop of the Diocese of Broken Bay. There is now an activity. Please watch the Reportable Conduct Scheme by the Office of the Children's Guardian video. Refer to the guided learning notes for the link to the video and for the start and stop instructions. You may pause the video now. Welcome back. A further check-in question. The question is, what is your responsibility as a Working with Children check holder who falls under the Reportable Conduct Scheme? A. Report any concerns about any worker's behaviour towards children to the Office for Safeguarding immediately before doing anything. B. Talk to the child and the worker about your concerns. Or C. Do nothing. The answer is A. Report any concerns about any worker's behaviour towards children to the Office for Safeguarding immediately before doing anything. Reporting crimes to New South Wales Police. The New South Wales Government introduced reforms to strengthen child sexual abuse laws. These were introduced in June 2018. These laws include failure to report offence and failure to protect offence. Failure to report offence is explained as follows. Under the Crimes Act 1900, all adults in New South Wales are required to report information to police if they know, believe, or reasonably ought to know that a child under 18 years has been abused. Failure to protect offence is explained as follows. Under the Crimes Act 1900, an adult working in an institution, including a parish and chancery, doing child-related work will commit an offence if they know another adult working there poses a serious risk of abusing a child and they have the power to reduce or remove the risk and they fail to do so. Both these offences will be punishable by jail terms. A fact sheet is available. The issue of whether the offence will apply when a person received their information from a religious confession is covered by uniform evidence law that applies in multiple Australian jurisdictions. Evidence Act 1995, Section 1271 states, a person who is or was a member of the clergy of any church or religious denomination is entitled to refuse to divulge that a religious confession was made or the contents of a religious confession made to the person when a member of the clergy. Activity. Refer to the handout. The very first column to the left represents the 4 groups of people identified in the new legislation. Group 1 is a Working with Children check holder who is in a religious-based activity to children. Group 2 is a Working with Children check exemption holder who is in a religious-based activity to children. Group 3 is a Working with Children check holder who is in a non-religious-based activity to children. And Group 4 is a Working with Children check holder who is a religious minister. We will now consider these groups in a parish and chancery context. Let's determine what role fits in what group. Let's start with Group 1, which is a Working with Children check holder who is in a religious-based activity to children. Please write down 2 roles applicable to this group in column A. I will now read a list and you check if you have any written down. Have the acolyte, atrium coordinator, atrium teacher, CCD coordinator, children's choir leader, children's liturgy of the word team member, children's liturgy of the word leader, playgroup coordinator, sacramental coordinator, sacramental team facilitator, senior altar server, youth team assistant, youth team leader, SRE teacher. They are all performing a religious-based activity to children and therefore require a valid Working with Children check. Group 2 is a Working with Children check exemption holder who is in a religious-based activity to children. Please write down 2 roles applicable to this group in column A. I will now read a list and you check if you have any written down. Children's liturgy of the word leader, children's liturgy of the word team member, sacramental coordinator, sacramental team facilitator. An adult may only take on these roles because their child attends the activity. The parent is therefore exempt from providing a Working with Children check. Group 3 is a Working with Children check holder who is in a non-religious based activity to children. Please write down 2 roles applicable to this group in column A. I will now read a list and you check if you have any written down. CCD coordinator, if not a SRE teacher, diocesan director for safeguarding, parish manager, parish secretary, safeguarding manager, safeguarding officer. These roles are non-religious based activities to children. They support in ensuring that children are kept safe by providing accurate records, policies, procedures, etc. It is an administrative-based activity. Because there is access to records in relation to children, a valid Working with Children check is required. Group 4 is a Working with Children check holder who is a religious minister. Please write down 2 roles applicable to this group in column A. I will now read a list and you check if you have any written down. Deacon, priest, bishop, superior, provincial, vicar general. Let's now identify which groups are mandatory reporters. That is, someone who has a legal obligation to make a report when they have reasonable grounds to suspect that a child is at risk of significant harm. The legislation states that persons in religious ministry or providing religion-based activities to children, including those that have a Working with Children check exemption, are mandatory reporters. So which groups are mandatory reporters? Mark yes or no in your table in column 1. Please refer to the hint. This screen shows you the correct response. Please amend your table to represent this. So the youth team, children's liturgy leader, who has a Working with Children check exemption, and the clergy are mandatory reporters. But the parish secretary and the chancery safeguarding officer are not mandatory reporters because they are in a non-religious based activity to children. Please note the decision to report as a mandatory reporter falls to the worker. Are you a mandatory reporter? Answer question 1, yes or no. Circle your response at the bottom of the worksheet. Let's now determine who falls under the Reportable Conduct Scheme. The scheme covers the conduct of Working with Children check holders, excluding those who are exempt from the Working with Children check, towards children under 18, whether that conduct occurs at home or at work. So which groups fall under the Reportable Conduct Scheme? Mark yes or no in your table in column 2. Please refer to the hint. This screen shows you the correct response. Please amend your table to represent this. So everyone that holds a Working with Children check falls under the scheme. However, a Children's Liturgy volunteer who has a Working with Children exemption does not. It is legislated that the employer, that is, the parish priest, administrator, or director for the Chancery offices, must inform their worker about the Reportable Conduct Scheme. Who must the reporter inform about the Reportable Conduct Scheme? Fill in column 3 as displayed here. When applicable, these workers are required to report inappropriate conduct identified in the legislation to the Office for Safeguarding, Chancery. Please fill in column 4 as shown here. Do you fall under the Reportable Conduct Scheme? Answer question 2. Circle yes or no. Under the Crimes Act, all adults in New South Wales are required to report information to police if they know, believe, or reasonably ought to know that a child under 18 years has been abused. So which groups must apply the failure to report legislation? Mark yes or no in your table in column 5. This screen shows you the correct response. Please amend your table to represent this. All adults must report. Under the Crimes Act, an adult working in an institution, including parish and chancery, doing child-related work will commit an offence if they know another adult working there poses a serious risk of abusing a child and they have the power to reduce or remove risk and they fail to do so. Who does the failure to protect legislation apply to? Look at column 6 of the table for the response we have provided. Please answer questions 3 and 4 at the bottom of your worksheet. Does the fail to report legislation apply to you? Does the fail to protect legislation apply to you? If you are a cleric, your response is yes to all 4 questions. If you are in some other role in the parish or chancery, where your role is not a religious activity to children, or you may have a Working with Children check exemption, then your answers will vary. Please read the practice guide to confirm your response for the above questions. Scenario-based activity. I will now provide you with a scenario, and then you are to consider your response. An example here is given. The scenario is, a 5-year-old girl attends children's liturgy. The leader has noticed over 4 weeks that the child always looks unclean and is smelly. The other children start to complain about a smell. The child sits by herself. A possible response is as follows. The leader is a Working with Children check holder because she is in a child-related role. She is a mandatory reporter and should use the MRG to seek an outcome about what she should do. The leader should inform the parish priest and provide the information to the Office for Safeguarding. This screen shows you scenario number 1. The scenario is, you are concerned about a child. The child is 12 years old and regularly attends your service. You notice he is becoming withdrawn. You notice bruises. You ask him about them. He says that his dad hit him, but he is not going to see him ever again. What would you do? Pause this video, consider your response. Refer to the guided learning notes for a summary of possible responses to the scenario. Scenario number 2. You were told by a parishioner that Stuart, youth group leader, is having an intimate relationship with a 15-year-old girl who is a member of the youth group. The leader and the girl have been seen out together and they are friends on social media. What do you do? Hint: remember, the reportable conduct scheme is an allegation-based scheme. Pause the video while you consider your response. Refer to the guided learning notes for a summary of possible responses to the scenario. Thank you for your participation. Please contact the Office for Safeguarding if you have any further questions or need to engage us for support. I will end with a reference to St. Ignatius and leave you with 3 questions. What have I done for Christ? What am I doing for Christ? And what will I do for Christ? You may like to place these questions in the context of safeguarding and ask, what have I done for the vulnerable to safeguard them? What am I doing for the vulnerable to safeguard them? And what will I do for the vulnerable to safeguard them?